Stick around to the end to see how I've harmonized this jazz melody in advanced 5-part harmony. A while back I asked for submissions for original melodies over some standard changes, and Marius Muntekas sent me a great tune that for me immediately evoked the cool jazz style. It's a nice swinging bebop melody with some nice chromaticism and enclosures. I'm going to start off in quite a bit of detail and then accelerate as the video goes on. If you're into advanced jazz harmony, then this is going to be for you. If you've seen my Boplicity Deconstructed video, you'll know that I tend to analyse advanced soli passages in certain ways. I look for target chords, diatonic chords, functional chords, and other chords. Target chords are strategically important notes in the melody that need to be harmonized strongly. They give sense and direction to the harmony. Diatonic chords are chords that can be found in the parent key or in the key of the current moment. I tend to include non-functional secondary dominants here too. Functional chords are chord 5 and secondary dominants that lead to their own one chord. Other chords are ones that don't fit in these categories and are often derived from interesting voice leading or chromaticism. And when I harmonize tunes, I use this method as well. The first thing I do is to pick out the target chords. Have a look at this melody. There are some really strong moments on beat 1 in the first 4 bars. Target chords don't always need to be on the beat. For instance, in bar 4, beat 2 and is another spot for a really strong target chord. In the first phrase, beat 1 is important, as is this beat 1 in bar 2. Then the next most important note would probably be beat 4, the F, as it's a higher note, and then beat 3, the D, as the semiquavers run down to it. I like to start with the bass line when working on these melodies. It's my first rule. I like to have a swinging melody in the bass that has goal-orientated motion, just like the original melody does above it. I try and think of the bass melody and the harmonies as I create the bass melody. So when I've put the bass notes in on the target chords, I can start looking at the general contour of the bass line and creating the melody. So I'll place my E flat, and my C here of course, and I'll try an E flat under here, which is another semi-important moment. So now what do I do? When I have chords to fill, I'll try diatonic or functional chords first. So how about if I placed a G here, thinking of it as a 3-7 that goes toward its own 1, chord 6. And I could try the same here, as it's the same melody note. Now I'm starting to get a shape in the bass line, so I'll connect these with an F to make a scale. And I could continue this by placing a B flat and an A flat here. That line looks pretty good. I especially like how there is contrary motion and that the target chords land where they should. Let's have a listen to it. Yeah, that sounds good. Then I like to hear the bass line with the melody. I usually do this on the piano, but thanks to Patricio, I have these nice examples to play you. Then I fill in 3 inner parts. So for this E flat in the bass and F in the melody, I'll try an E flat chord of some sort. I'll put a 7th in, and a 3rd, and one more pitch, the 5th. There we go, a nice E flat major 9. Where possible, the 3 inner parts should be new pitches so that I get a 5-note chord with 5 distinct pitches, a melody, a bass note, and 3 inner parts. However, it's not always possible or feasible to do this. Have a look at the C minor target note. We have an E flat in the melody and have a C in the bass. Then I'll place a 7th and the 5th, as we already have the 3rd in the melody part. Now I don't really want to add a 9th here, as it will be a semitone away from the melody. This will be too dissonant on a part where the melody lands so firmly on beat 1. I could add an 11th, but it's not a great voicing, so I'll just put in the root note again. This chord now only contains 4 distinct pitches as the root is doubled, but I think it's the best option in this case. A similar thing happens with the first note of the tune, where the bass and melody are the same pitch. Sometimes I use an inversion in these moments, but for simplicity and for a strong sense of the tonality, I just kept it simple with an E flat 6 chord. There's the 6th, the 5th and a 3rd. Okay, let's work on the G7 functional chords. I tend to harmonize the melody in order of importance, starting at the target chords and working my way from other structural notes to passing notes. So for the G7, I'll add a flat 7, and then a 3rd. Now for one more, I'll add the flat 9. I chose the flat 9 as it's diatonic to the key, but I can always change this later. I'll do the same for this one. Now I'll work on the rest. This F melody note with a B flat in the bass could just be treated as a diatonic chord. What is the chord in E flat major that is B flat in the bass? Yes, it's chord 5, B flat 7. I'll add a 3rd, a 7th, and a 9th. There we go, B flat 9. Now for the E flat melody, I'll do the same. 7th, 3rd, and 9th, an A flat major 7. See how the bass line can instruct what the chord will be? It's an interesting way of harmonizing. These techniques I've learnt by studying the music of Gil Evans. So far this looks and would sound very similar to the harmonies found in Boplicity from the Birth of the Cool album. Then lastly we have this E flat melody note and an F in the bass. Let's try another diatonic chord. Chord 2 would be F minor 7. I'll put in a 3rd, a 5th, and a 9th, F minor 9. This works fine, but one of my rules is that you should not repeat a note in the same part. The 3rd horn here would be playing an A flat, then another A flat, before moving to the B flat. And the 4th horn would be playing a G here, and then another G in the E flat major chord. Like any music rule, this isn't hard and fast. Break the rules when necessary, but it's an interesting thing to think about and try. I mostly have this rule so that the horn player can really swing their line and maintain forward motion just like the melody does. So how about if I change the A flat to A natural? We'd get some sort of F7 chord. That would work well. And then I could change the G, the 9th, to a G flat, the flatter 9th. So I would have an F7 flat 9 here. The 3rd horn would have A flat, A, then B flat. Very nice. The 4th horn would have F, G flat, and G. Also great. So in this case, I changed the diatonic 2 chord, F minor 7, to an F7 flat 9, chord 2 7. This happens a lot when harmonizing in this way, and in standard chord changes secondary dominants are extremely common. So much so that I tend to think of secondary dominants that don't function as a 5 to be diatonic chords. Let me know in the comments what you think about that, and if you agree or not. So that's the first phrase done. Here's what it sounds like. So to recap, I start with the target chords and bass line, and then I fill in the harmony with diatonic and functional chords. Sometimes I need other chords, which I'll touch on now, with the second phrase which lands on beat 1 of bar 3. Here the melody lands nicely on the 9th of F minor, so I can have a solid F at the bottom. And I can even put in my 3 inner parts now, a 3rd, a 7th, and a 5th, F minor 9. When you have a long chromatic scale like this, it's usually simplest to use chromatic planing. I'll just go backwards from the target chord, maintaining a chromatic scale. The chord is usually kept the same as well, so this one would be C sharp minor 9, D minor 9, and so on. Then for these two notes, I can try diatonic chords again. How about I follow the same contour of the last 2 beats and keep going up with the scale. A B flat and a C in the bass. So I'll use chord 5, B flat 9, and chord 6, C minor 9. That works well. Even though the original chord for this bar was C minor 7, it's not really possible to use C minor harmony throughout the bar. That's one cool thing about this method. You rely on the target chords to give the music sense, and the nice swinging bass line and inner parts to give the music interesting forward motion. In music school I was taught to harmonize chord tones with other chord tones, and passing notes with other passing notes. But I don't think about that now, and I use this method instead. Here is the bass line of what we've done so far. Cool, eh? And here is the bass line and melody together. And here's what it sounds like all together. I'm going to come back to bar 3. It's a bit tricky. On to bar 4. First I look for the important melody notes and make them my target chords. Beat 2 and is an important moment, so I'll have a nice solid G in the bass there. This chromatic rise to the A is another target chord, so I'll place a C under there. And finally, the G melody note on beat 1 is important. I'll place a D under there. Okay, now for the other bass note pitches. Well, on this note, I could try a functional chord and use a tritone sub. It's functional because it would have been a D7 to lead to the G, but I've substituted it, so it's an A flat 7. That's commonly done in lots of jazz big band music. Now I've already noticed this chromatic rising melody here, so I could do the same as I did before and have the bass melody rise up chromatically as well. But I feel like some contrary motion might be nice to really strengthen this important moment here. So I'll try a descending chromatic part. The G melody works well as it's the same as before with the D and the bass. You could see this as a diatonic chord, and I'll connect them with a D flat and the bass. The D flat is likely to be another tritone substitution, a functional chord. Here is what that bass melody sounds like. And now the melody and bass part. Now for the inner parts. First I'll do the G7. The 7th, we have 3rd in the melody, flat 9, and 5th, there we go, a G7 flat 9. And now for the D minor 7, I'll try this voicing, flat 3rd, flat 7, and flat 5th. That's okay, it works, but there is suddenly a lot more space in this chord. I haven't talked about open and closed voicing so far, as this melody is quite low, so most of the voicings are in closed position. It's okay to change between open and closed position in the right circumstances, but I'm just not loving that voicing. I'll try this one. I'll replace the 3rd for a 9th, so it comes out like a sus chord with a flattened 5th. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll do the same for the chord later in the bar. Now for the C minor chord with a 6th in the melody. Here's the 3rd, 7th, and 9th. I'm not loving that sound. I don't mind a C minor 6 chord with a 5th or a 3rd on the top, but I don't love this voicing. So I'm going to change the chord to a C7, treating it as a chord 5 or functional chord to the upcoming F7. Now I can hear you say, wait, Marius wrote you this nice melody and you're changing the harmony that he supplied. Is this allowed? Yes, it is. If you don't like the sound of something, make sure you change it. Following your own taste is one way of making your music sound unique to you. If you like the sound of C minor 6 with a 6 on top, please use it. So now we have a C13. Now for the D melody note with A flat in the bass. This will be an A flat 7, 3rd, flat 7, and a 5th. There, an A flat 7 with a sharp 11th. Now for this D flat in the bass. I'll have some sort of D flat 7 chord, a 3rd, flat 7, and a 9th. It's good to check the voice leading at this point and make sure I don't have any repeated notes in the same part, which is my 4th rule. It's looking good. Here's what that sounds like. This phrase was relatively difficult. It doesn't really work to use many diatonic chords as the melody is too chromatic. Runs of eighth notes in the bebop style are the hardest moments to harmonize as a soli. It is totally acceptable to have a long-held note under a passage like this, but as I asked for submissions, I thought I'd better come up with a solution in the same style. So here it is. I identified my target chords, which are both F7s. I'll put in the inner parts now for speed. And I actually changed this target chord for a B flat 9 as I felt another F here wouldn't give me enough movement. So with these notes identified, I thought the simplest thing to do is to move the chords and bassline just as the chromatic melody notes move. For example, I'll add a G9 and a G flat to approach this note. And I'll do the same for this one. See how just adding a few chords can help you get a shape for the phrase right away? Now for this note, I thought of it as a chromatic step below this target chord, so I wrote in a A9. That only leaves me with 3 notes left in the phrase. I'll add a C here at beat 1 and, as it helps to outline F7, and another C here as it follows the contour of the melody nicely. And both of these will work as diatonic chords, which means they'll be C minor 9s. That just leaves this note. I could have continued the chromatic theme here, but I'll go with a functional chord. What chord 5 leads to G9? D7, of course. And I'm going to make the chord slightly more befitting of the E flat major tonality and keep the A flat and put a E flat in there as well, a flat 9. I really like that bass line, and the inner parts work well. Whoops, I see a wee mistake in here. That often happens when you're working in short score. On to the next phrase. In this bar I tried several diatonic and functional options, but I felt like a B flat pedal works really well and gives a boplicity type of sound. For the harmonies, I kept the same shape over the pedal point. This technique can often work well for diatonic passages, over pedal points, or over independent bass lines. I did this in my harmonization of anthropology on another video. I don't mind that I've weakened 5 chords slightly by using a sus chord. I think it helps to keep things slightly unresolved before I come back to the start of the next phrase. You'll notice that I've sped up a bit here, but I think it would be good to say that I worked on this for quite a while before I came up with these solutions. I usually do at least 3 different bass lines for each phrase. This note here is crying out to be a target note. In school, I was taught to harmonize this sort of note, a passing note, with a passing chord, which in this instance I think is bullshit. It's crying out to be a target chord. It's the last important note before the next section, so I'll make it a chord 5. With this G in the melody, it'll be a 13th chord of some sort, but that doesn't matter. The function is more important, and it will sound good. For this chord, I'll just use a good old 2 chord, 7th, 5th, 3rd, and I'll make it a F7 sharp 9 rather than a F minor 7. So I can have 5 distinct pitches, like almost every other chord. I'm not so concerned with a strong harmony on this note, as it's just a pickup to beat 1. So I'll move chromatically down to my next target chord, and these notes can move chromatically up, just like the melody does. It makes for an interesting chord, but it works well. Okay, now on to that tricky bar 3, and I'm going to do the one in the second A first, as I'm going to show you 2 different techniques. It's tricky to harmonize a chromatic passage like this. Using diatonic chords won't work. So I tried some functional chords first, and I thought the result was okay, but not great. I'll show you what I did. For the pitch G, like on beat 1, I tried a F minor 9 again. So what leads to a F minor 7? A C7, of course, with the sharp 11 in the melody in this case. And what leads to the D chord here? An A7, of course, in this case with a 13th. So for this A flat melody, I did another functional chord, a tritone sub of E7, a B flat 7. This is one way to get around tricky parts, but in this case I just didn't really like the result, which is just a matter of personal taste. So I tried two other techniques. For one, I used a pedal point under almost all of the chords, and for the second one, I did a reharmonization which allowed me to use other chords that I like the sound of. Here's the first technique. So I place the F on the bottom and that changes the complexion of the bar. Now I can harmonize all of the diatonic melody notes with diatonic chords. These three, with taking the bass note into account, are F minor 9s. And these two will be B flat 7s. Now for the F sharp pitches. I just use chromatic planing for both of them, making sure that each part, like the melody does, just rises a semitone to the next chord. And for interest, I'll do the same in the bass for the last melody note. And I'll add a syncopated octave leap in the gap in the melody. Here's what that sounds like. For the second option, I tried some reharmonization so I could have some new target chords. I did this in my sax soli video as well when the melody wasn't that related to the underlying chord. Because of the F sharp or G flat and the A flat in the melody, I thought of a type of backdoor progression which is usually a 4 minor and a flat 7/7. But I changed that to an A flat 7 and a D flat 7. This allowed me to create a rising part in the bass and find suitable chords in the inner parts. Here I could try a diatonic C minor 9 again, but I've got a repeated E flat, so I'll change it to a dominant chord again. And for this final melody note, I'll just use an E flat 7, a bit like a tritone substitute. For the 16th notes, I just used the same upper structure as the A flat 7, which was a diminished chord. So we have a B diminished 7 and a B flat diminished. Then I used contrary motion in the bass to lead strongly to the A flat 7. And that's how I got around the tricky bar 3. Of course, when you're reharmonizing, use your ear and see what you like the sound of. For the second A section, I mostly used the same harmonies, except for a few instances. In bar 9, the first bar of the second A section, Marius changed the melody a little. I tried a more diatonic approach to the bar this time, using all diatonic chords. I used chord 1, chord 4, and 5, and 1 again. It leads nicely to chord 6 in bar 2. And here I used chord 2. I'll fill in the inner parts. In bar 12 and 13, I tried a different approach in the second half of the bar. It's another option instead of the C minor 6. I used a B flat major 7 over a C, or C13 sus. And I tried parallel motion rather than the contrary motion of the first A. This led nicely to a rising bass part in the next bar where the bass line moves up to the third in a syncopated rhythm. Gil often added interest in the bass horn during long notes. In this bar, I kept the same harmony except I tried a different chord here. Instead of using a functional D7 chord, which leads to the G9 chord, I used the C9 in inversion, which is a 5 to the F7. I tried this to try and keep the sound of C7 from this bar for longer. Have a listen in the playback at the end and see if you have a preference. Marius ended the second A section differently, so I adjusted my harmony to suit. I didn't want to repeat the B flat in the bass for the target chord, so I opted for its tritone sub E natural, or E7, which gave me a nice chance to lead down to it with a scale. Then I just used diatonic chords for the harmony. On scalar passages, it often pays to aim toward the next target chord with an independent bass line, rather than try and come up with a new harmony for each note. Consequently, as a result, you'll notice that it gives us some spicy chords. And a couple of them don't have 5 distinct pitch classes, but landing nicely on the E7 is more important, especially in bebop or faster melodies. I changed this D to a D flat to avoid a repeated note for a nice strong landing on the target chord of E7. Then I use a strong 5-1 bass movement for the ending and place in the final chord. I'll use a nice resolved E flat 6-9. For the penultimate chord, I tried a F minor 7 over B flat for a different sound on the ending. I made a mistake and didn't spot my repeated note here, and there is one other place in the harmony where I did this accidentally. See if you can find it and let me know in the comments. And that's it. Stick around to the end to hear the whole playthrough of the tune. I hope you enjoyed that fairly detailed dive into advanced jazz harmonization. For the instrumentation, I have a clarinet and alto sax on the melody, an alto sax and 2 tenors on the inner parts, and the beautiful bass clarinet on the bass melody. Thanks so much to Marius for the awesome tune and playing the drums. Thanks to Patricio for the awesome horn parts. And thanks to my bass regular, Gabriel Casaro. Please check out their channels.